So let's talk about the United Nations. Is it just some outdated bureaucracy, or is it literally the only thing standing between us and total global chaos? Today, we're going to break down what the UN actually is and why, for all its flaws, it might be more important right now than it has ever been. To really get the UN, you've got to rewind to the end of the Cold War. You know, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the United States was left as the world's only superpower. But that moment also kicked off a whole new set of global problems, problems that were just way too big for any single country, even a superpower, to solve on its own. And I mean, think about it, right? We're talking about global warming, terrorism that crosses every border, pandemics like COVID-19, and these massive interconnected financial crises. None of these things care about lines on a map. Suddenly, the old way of doing things where each country just handled its own business wasn't going to cut it anymore. We desperately needed a place where everyone could come together and try to tackle these things as a planet.
And that brings us to this quote, which honestly just nails it. This is the whole idea in a nutshell. The UN isn't here to create some kind of perfect utopia. Its job is much more basic, and maybe much more important. It's here to stop the absolute worst from happening. It's a damage control tool, really, designed to keep us from spiraling into total disaster.
So if the goal is to save us from hell on Earth, where did an idea this big even come from? Well, you might think it was born out of some peaceful conference, but no. The truth is the UN was forged in the ashes of the most destructive wars in human history. Let's trace how we got here. After the absolute horror of World War I, the world tried to build something called the League of Nations. The goal was simple: make sure a war like that never, ever happens again. Well, it failed. Big time. That failure led directly to the even deadlier Second World War. So in 1945, with the world in ruins, everybody decided to try again. They learned from their mistakes and built a stronger, better version, the United Nations. And its mission was crystal clear: prevent World War III. Now, the way the UN is set up is kind of fascinating because it's built on a major contradiction. On one hand, you've got the General Assembly. Think of it like a giant global town hall. Every single country, all 193 of them, gets a seat and a vote. It's the democratic heart of the UN. But then you have the Security Council, and this is where the real power is. It's a tiny group of just 15 countries, and 5 of them are permanent members who can kill any decision with a single no vote, the veto. So you have one body where everyone talks, and another where a handful of countries make the final call. Okay, so this brings us to the big question of our entire explainer. The world of today looks nothing like the world of 1945. So, can an organization that was designed for that post-war era, can it really handle the problems we're facing in the 21st century? Is it still relevant? Let's just put it out there. Is the UN stuck in a 1945 mindset? I mean, the global power structure has completely shifted. You have giants like China and India on the world stage, tons of new countries exist, and the challenges we have now, cyber warfare, climate change, they weren't even on the radar back then. So it's no surprise that pretty much everyone is calling for some serious reforms. And all this talk about reform, it really just boils down to 2 huge debates. First, there's structural reform. That's all about who gets to be on that super powerful Security Council. And then there's jurisdictional reform, which is basically arguing about what the UN should even be doing. Should it focus on peacekeeping, or should it be more about humanitarian aid and development? Everybody agrees things need to change, but nobody can agree on what to change. All right, let's zoom in on that first debate because, man, it is heated. This is the fight for a permanent seat at the big table, the Security Council. So over the years, people have come up with a list of criteria for what it would take to become a new permanent member. You know, you should be a major economic power, have a major military, you should be putting a lot of money into the UN budget, you should have a big population, and you should be a country that, respects democracy and human rights. Sounds pretty reasonable on paper, right? Well, here's the catch. How in the world do you define major? How big does your economy have to be to count? Is having 1 billion people an asset that gets you a seat, or is it a huge challenge that disqualifies you? These terms are so fuzzy and open to interpretation that they just end up causing more arguments. It makes getting everyone to agree next to impossible. And that gets us to the biggest roadblock of all, the veto power. The 5 permanent members have this exclusive right, and asking them to share it, let alone give it up, it's not going to happen. This analogy from our source material is just perfect. It's like street cricket. He who owns the bat gets to bat first. It's their bat. They control the game, and they have absolutely zero reason to give up that advantage.
I mean, just look at India's campaign for a permanent seat. The arguments for it are incredible. It's the world's biggest democracy, has the largest population, it's a huge economic player, and it contributes a ton to UN peacekeeping missions. But the arguments against it are just as powerful. You've got rivals like Pakistan and China who would block it. You've got other big countries like Brazil, Japan, and Germany who say, hey, what about us? And maybe the biggest argument of all, entire continents like Africa and South America don't have a single permanent seat. So it's a political mess. So yeah, the internal politics of trying to reform the UN are just a total tangled web. But that's not even the only problem. The UN also has to function in a world where there's one undeniable superpower, and this leads us to its biggest external challenge, its relationship with the United States. And you have to ask, right, in a world dominated by one single superpower, can the UN really act as a check on that power? Can it truly stand up to the United States? Or does it always have to operate within the limits that the US sets?
Let's be real, the US has massive influence inside the UN. It's the #1 financial contributor by a long shot. The UN headquarters is literally in New York City. It has that all-powerful veto on the Security Council, and it has a huge say in who gets the top jobs. So trying to get the UN to do something that goes directly against major US interests, it's practically impossible.
So here is the thing to remember. The UN was never meant to be a world government that could boss around superpowers. That's not its job. Its real value, its true power, is that it is the one place on Earth where all 193 nations can come together to talk, to argue, to negotiate, and sometimes actually find a compromise. It is the indispensable stage for global diplomacy.
And that kind of leaves us with one last big question. The UN is absolutely flawed. It's bureaucratic, it's frustratingly slow, it's often unfair, but in this crazy, interconnected world of 8 billion people facing crises that affect every single one of us, what's the alternative? Without a place like the UN, we probably wouldn't be any closer to heaven, but you can bet we'd be a whole lot closer to hell.